There are different channels through which the financial sector or the financial development is contributing to the economic growth process. And major channel is through the savings and investments. And the other theory is the financial regulation theory. And before we discuss about the financial regulation theory, let me tell you there are two schools of thought. One school of thought talks about the market should be regulated or that should be government intervention. That already you might have some idea whenever we talk about the Keynesian macroeconomic theories, because Keynes believes in the concept of the interventions of the government. And another theory, which is the classical theory or the neoclassical theory, which believes in the concept of the free market. And in this particular scenario, there are merits and demerits of these two different schools of thought, whether for the development the government intervention is required or not. And if there is government intervention, what are those different advantages we can get? And if there is no government intervention also, then what are the different type of merits or different type of benefits this particular market can get? So considering that two schools of thought, we can always discuss about the financial regulation theory and the financial liberalization theory. You know that markets are always prone to the failure. Financial markets are prone to the failure. So you have many examples, like whatever financial crisis is happening in today's context. You might have heard about the Southeast Asian crisis. You might have heard about the US subprime crisis, which has happened in 2008. And before that also there are dot-com bubbles and other kind of things which have happened in the market over the period of time. So these are nothing but the failure of the market, which creates some kind of demand in the market, which is superficial, or there is some kind of bubble which exists, which is not driven by the macroeconomic fundamentals. So in that point of time, the government has to intervene into that. So particularly after the US subprime crisis, there is a book which is written as Returns to Keynes. That means almost all the economies in the world are trying to use this concept of neoclassical theory. The basic development of the growth process was based upon the neoclassical theory. But particularly after the crisis, again, these regulators or the government or the markets are trying to follow the Keynesian framework mostly. That's why we can call it the returns to Keynes. So whenever the financial markets are prone to the failure, in that particular point of time, the government has to intervene to make this market stabilize. So to make this particular stabilization policy, government has to use certain instruments, certain kind of policy measures have to be taken. By that, the failure of the market can be avoided. So on that particular principle, the financial regulation theory is based upon. What is the argument? In terms of the financial market, if the financial market is regulated and government has to intervene into that, then one thing can happen, that government can always go for the low level of interest rate. So what is in today's context also, if you look at India is also following the low level of interest rate. The Reserve Bank of India is not continuously changing the interest rate in the market, or they're keeping the interest rate low. Particularly, I'm talking about the policy rates, like repo rates, reverse repo rates, all kinds of rates, which are in the control of Reserve Bank of India or the regulatory body. So whenever there is a low interest rate, and the low interest rate is possible whenever there is a intervention from the government side. So if there is a low interest rate, then what will happen that it will increase the demand for the loans. And once the demand for loans will be increasing, then we are expecting that the investment will be better off. The investments will be better off. And by that process, the total output of the economy can be increased. If the loan rate will be low, then corporate sector can get the cheaper funds, and that funds can be utilized for the production purposes. And finally, the total output can be enhanced. That is one logic. And the interest rate, if it is completely driven by the market, sometimes it is difficult also to decline the interest rate, because the demand and supply forces are not in the control of the market. It is in the control of the market only. It is not in the control of the government. So this is the first advantage.
Sir.
Yes.
I have a doubt. When there is recession, then the Keynes model says that recession is overcome by if the government invests, like when there is autonomous investment, because the demand is low. So even if the production rises, it will not be sold. So how will decreasing the interest rate overcome the recession?
So you are talking about if there is lot of autonomous investment, but still there is no demand in the market. That is what you are telling. So if there is no demand in the market, then the products will not be sold. This is your question.
Yes.
We are not talking about the autonomous investments only. We are talking about the induced investments also. Right? Who does the autonomous investments? Government. But here I am not talking about the investments made by the government. I'm talking about the investments made by the corporate sector or the business houses. And this theory assumes that, because Keynes theory is completely based upon the aggregate effective demand, we have to create the demand, right? What do you mean by the aggregate effective demand? You might have heard this famous line, dig the holes and try to pour it up. Yes or no?
Yes.
So in this concept, your argument is partially true. The question is, if you are going for autonomous investment only in terms of the public expenditure, that is not going to help the economy in the 100% sense or in a true sense. But if the production will be made by the producers in terms of the corporate houses or the business sector is trying to produce, the business sector will produce whenever there is an effective demand or there is a demand which is created in the market.
Yes, sir, but as the demand is less, then the corporate sector won't be willing to produce that.
Obviously,
Government has
if
to
demand will not be there, so you see, demand will not be there whenever there is a full employment, right? The demand will not be there whenever there is a full employment. But in true sense, the economy is not in the full employment. There is always an underemployment equilibrium.
Yes, sir.
So if there is an underemployment underemployment equilibrium exists in the market, then the particular increase in the investment will be possible if there is a low interest rate. The interest rate is nothing but, you see, it is we are talking about the demand for the loans, and the demand for loans from the various perspective. It may be a housing loan, it may be a education loan, it may be a loan for the corporate sector investments where they can put the money to produce more. So there are various ways. We are talking about the financial sector perspective. The money can be flown to the market through the different channels if the interest rate will be relatively low. Right? And here also we are assuming, if you are believing in the Keynesian theory, then we are assuming that there is no full employment and there is still there is a capacity utilization. There is some resources which are available, which are not basically fully utilized in the market. So because of this, if you decline the interest rate, to some extent, it will basically affect the investment process. But what you say that if your employment is full, and as well as there is no capacity utilization, maybe this lowering the interest rate is not going to be helped. Okay, Rensa, is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
I got it.
And the next thing is that if government will intervene, then there are certain sectors which are neglected automatically by the market forces. You talk about the priority sectors, agriculture, small scale industries, because the probability of non-performance of this particular sector is relatively high. This particular sector may work, may not work. If the banks, for example, if I can give you a simple example, if the bank is giving a loan for the agricultural sector, then maybe the particular person who has taken the loan, this particular loan is not utilized in a better way, then it is not going to help the market in terms of the employability or in terms of the production. But those sectors has to be encouraged, because that also creates the employment, that also helps us to produce certain better products or certain kind of product which is required by the other stakeholders in the particular system. So that's why we have a concept of the priority sector lending. So there is some amount of money has to be provided to different sectors, and this particular money has to be completely reserved for particular sector. So that is the government regulation. So that's why there are different direct credit programs what government can initiate. By that, those sectors which are not that lucrative from the financial institutions point of view in terms of enhancing the profitability or enhancing the revenue, but still they are bound to provide that kind of credits or that kind of financing to those kind of sectors, which basically makes the balance between the different sectors. Or there is some kind of equality in terms of the distributions of the credit across the different sectors. So that thing will be possible if there is an intervention from the government or there is a regulation from the government. So if there is no regulation from the government, then what basically will happen? The banks and financial institutions will provide the loan only to those sectors where they feel that they can enhance their profit or they can extract more revenue from that particular sector. But if there is a government intervention, then some kind of equality, some kind of uniformity can be maintained across the sectors for their development. So that is another advantage what basically we can get in terms of the financial regulation theory. And whenever you talk about the government intervention, the government intervention makes many services as a public good. Public good means anybody can use that particular product, or anybody will be able to utilize that particular resources in an effective way, which is not basically possible whenever you talk about the free market systems. So that's why most of the services what basically we can expect from this particular market. So that particular expectations will be possible whenever this access to that particular service or access to that particular good will be public. That is basically another thing which will be happening in that particular context. And the most important thing is, due to the government intervention, your payment system will be stable. You see, in India or any other country, we have two types of systems. In other way, if you are defining, the systems are like, some systems are basically, we call it the market driven system, and some systems are the bank driven systems. That means all the payment systems or payment gateway is basically always we can consider the bank. So all type of transactions are carried out through the banks only. So in India comes under that, because all type of transactions which happen in the Indian system, whether you invest in the stock market or you are taking the loans or you are going for an insurance policy, whatever thing you are doing, every time our bank is playing the role in terms of that particular payment activities. So due to the government intervention, due to some regulatory norms, the payment system will be stable, and as well as it, to some extent also, it will be secured in the mind of the stakeholders who are using that particular services from this particular sector. So financial regulation or the intervention from the government makes this payment system stable. That means there are certain kind of constraints, there are certain kind of we can say that restrictions which can be put which make this particular system secure. Still, there are different type of frauds and all these things which are happening, but the percentage of those things are relatively less. The reason is basically because of the regulation, because of the different guidelines given by the Reserve Bank of India and other kind of regulatory bodies. We are now little bit secure in terms of the payment system within this particular market. So that's why government regulations or government intervention makes this particular system stable or secure. In that particular case, we can say that it has a lot of contribution to the growth process overall. So these are the some of the points what basically we have highlighted, which talks about the advantages of the financial regulation theory. That means in overall, we can say if there is a financial regulation, if the market is regulated, if there is government intervention, then these are the different benefits what we can draw. By that, the financial sector can be developed. So in that particular process, this it can contribute to the growth process in a larger extent. But there are certain people or there are certain kind of advocates who always believes in the concept of the liberalization, free market. So in the free market, you see that if you observe, previously there was a debate that why the interest rates in the Indian market is relatively higher in comparison to the other countries. The reason was most of the people have argued that one argument is this Indian market is more risky. Because of that, to make these investments made by the other foreign investors, we have to make this interest rate higher. Because of that, they can get the borrowings from their market at a lower rate and invest that particular money in the Indian market at a higher rate. Okay. But the question here is that this basically assumes that if you increase the interest rate and the return from the particular financial assets will be higher, then the players in the market will be more. The players in the market will be more in the sense, it is not only the domestic investors, we can also bring certain investors from the other markets. Because simple logic, what I told you, they can borrow at a lower rate from their own markets and invest the money in the domestic market with a higher rate. Let in India, they can borrow from the US at a lower rate and invest in India at a higher rate. So in that case, what basically will happen, they can generate certain profit. So in that particular process, what will happen, that more players will be there, which if the more players will be there, then the market will be competitive. At the end of the day, the interest rate will go down to a certain extent where the equilibrium can be established. And that equilibrium can be established because of the existence of the more players. More investors or more market participants, that will basically automatically come down to interest rate in a particular level. But to attract more investors, we have to keep that interest rate is relatively in the higher level. So let that market will take care of that thing. That is what basically the argument this advocate of the financial liberalization theory talks about. And another argument, this particular theory says, increase in savings. Automatically, if the interest rate will be higher, then obviously the savings will be more. If the savings will be more, then people will hold more real assets. Real assets means I'm talking about the holding of the reduction in the holding of the real assets means we are talking about the physical assets. If there is an increase in savings, then there is a reduction in the holding of the real assets, but the financial sector will be more developed in the sense the circulation of the money or investments, what basically people are trying to make, they will make more in the financial assets because the return from the financial assets will be higher because of the availability of the funds within that particular system. So that means people will shift their fund from the consumption to the investment. So in that particular process, the more money can come to the market and automatically that money can be utilized for the various productive uses. And finally, this development can take place. So that's why there is expansion in the supply of the credit. there is expansion in the supply of the credit. And if there is expansion in the supply of the credit, already I told you that will increase the investment. And if the investment will increase, then there is a possibility that it can increase the average productivity of the investment and also the allocative efficiency of the investment. So the efficiency, productivity, all these things can be possible if you have more savings which is available with you, because the neoclassical theory believes in the concept of the savings will be only utilized for the investment. That means always the savings should be more than the investments, and the equality can be established whenever there is savings is equal to the investment. But in the true sense, if you observe that it is not the case in the real world scenario, sometimes also we can create this particular kind of funds, we can create the investments, or we can invest more than the savings by the different other avenues, whatever we have. We can borrow, or we can also borrow from the outside markets. Or there are many other alternatives through which this always the savings is a factor which is affecting investment that may not prevail in the market. So that is basically the logic of the financial liberalization theory. But we cannot say that whether the financial liberalization is good or financial regulation is good. Every aspect has their own merit. So in overall, if you see that financial regulation to some extent is required, but most of the things should be also always should be in the hand of the market. So in today's context, if you look at, if you compare it to the Indian scenario, India previously, bank deposits rate, your loan rates, everything was determined by the government. Everything was determined by the government. So that time it was not market determined. So in today's world, the Reserve Bank of India can only change the policy rates, like repo rate, reverse repo rate, and all these things. And other rates, like at what rate we are taking the loans, or what rate basically we are keeping our money as a saving deposits. So these things are to some extent are market determined. So once they have kept certain things in their own purview, by that they can regulate those things. And those kind of interest rates, what we call it the policy rates, those are linked to the other rates which basically prevailed in the market. So if you can change those things, or the government will change those things, then automatically there is a possibility that the other rates can change. By that, it will have the impact on the demand and supply of the funds in the system. So in that process, the development of the sector can possible, and as well as that will have the impact on the economic growth process. So that is basically the overall, we can say that to some extent, some regulation is required, but most of the things should be kept in the hand of the market only. So this is what basically what we call it from the financial regulations or the financial liberalization theory. Okay, so these are the different 5 theories which basically trying to establish a kind of theoretical linkage between the financial sector development and economic growth process, and the different channels which talks about how financial sector can contribute to the growth process. The next thing basically what we are going to discuss, that is basically how to measure this financial development. How to develop the financial development. So there are many ways the aggregate financial development can be measured, or there are many indicators we can use which can be used to measure the financial development. And as well as also there are some composite indicators we have which also tries to measure the financial development in the system. So what are those indicators? One of the indicator, we call it the finance ratio. Finance ratio. The finance ratio is nothing but it is the ratio of the total primary and secondary issues to the national income. Primary and secondary issues to the national income. That means how many funds or how much money has been raised in the financial market in terms of both primary market and as well as secondary market. And if you divide it with this national income, then we can call it the finance ratio. Already I explained you what is primary market. Primary market means it is the new issue market. Whenever first time the issue is shared or issue is particular kind of security is issued in the market, we call it the new issue market or the primary market. And once this particular issue is listed in the stock exchange or any other kind of secondary platform, then this becomes a secondary claim. So if you add up these two, so if this ratio is more, then we can say that the financial development is happening. That means financial ratio or the finance ratio has a positive or a direct relationship with the financial development. Second ratio we can use, that is called the financial interrelation ratio. The financial interrelation ratio talks about the ratio of the financial assets to the physical assets in the economy. How we can measure national income? Yes. Yes.
C plus I plus G.
नहीं वो तो सही है रे, लेकिन you tell me there are different, you have GDP, you have GNP, you have
Yes,
NNP.
sir.
So which one is the national income?
NNP.
What is that?
Net national product.
How you can measure this?
It is GNP. Yes, sir. It is GNP minus depreciation.
GNP minus depreciation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So what is it is NNP at factor cost or NNP at market price?
Sir, I think factor cost, but I'm not sure.
It is NNP at factor cost or NNP at market price? You are not sure?
Yes, sir.
It is NNP at factor cost, you are right. Okay. It is NNP at factor cost, and already you said that NNP is basically after deducting this depreciation. Okay, good. Okay, so the financial interrelation ratio basically talks about the ratio of the financial assets to the physical assets. So if the this ratio is more, we can say that in relation to the physical asset, the financial sector is more improved or more developed. And then you have another ratio that is called the new issue ratio. The new issue ratio is basically the ratio of the primary issues to the capital formation. That means how much primary issue is contributing to the system, which can be utilized for the capital formation in the market, which can be utilized for the capital formation in the market. That means how far the investment has been financed by the direct issues to the savers by the investing sectors. So how much extra money is coming to the market, which can be utilized for the investment, that is basically measured through the new issue ratio. Then we have the intermediation ratio. The intermediation ratio basically talks about the ratio of the secondary issues to the primary issues. Okay. So which basically says that to what extent the development of the financial institutions is working as a mobilizer of the funds relative to the real sectors as direct mobilizers of the funds. That means if the secondary issues are more developed, we can say that the money is better mobilized in the financial market, in the secondary market. But if the primary issues are more, that means we can say we are able to generate more funds for the investment in the system. So therefore, some people argue that if the secondary sector will be developed, this will attract more primary issues. But some people will argue that if the primary issues or primary market will be more developed, then it will attract more secondary issues. So that is basically, we call it the intermediation ratio. So it is very difficult. We can say that whether it is positively related to the financial development or negatively related to the financial development, but sector is more developed in terms of the secondary market, or it is more developed in terms of the primary market, that can tell you, you can guess it from the intermediation ratio. If you talk about Indian stock market, you see in Indian stock market, our IPO market is not that developed. That means your new issue market is not that developed, but our secondary market is quite developed. If you talk about the Indian stock market, our secondary market is quite developed, but primary market is not that developed in comparison to the other developed economies which are existing in the system. Then the other ratio is the ratio of the money to the national income. That means it talks about your finance money supply to the total national income, whatever we have. To higher this ratio, greater the financial development, because it basically tells that how the monetization is happening within this particular system and how the money is basically flown to the market. By that, or flown to the economy, by that it can contribute to the economic growth process. So that is called the ratio of the money to the national income. Then we have some other measures. It may not be the actual ratio terms. One of the measure is the proportion of the current account deficit, which is financed by the market related flows. What do you mean by current account deficit? Anybody? Yes? कौन बोलेगा? करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट क्या है रे? आयुष
आइडिया नहीं है सर.
आइडिया नहीं है?
नहीं सर, आइडिया.
Anybody else?
So the difference between the goods imported to exported.
It is the difference between export and import that you are telling?
Yes, sir. Like the total value, like of goods and services that are being imported minus the value of goods and services that are being imported.
So when deficit happens, whenever import is more or export is more?
When import is more.
Import is more. So this is basically import minus export. Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is related to the trade basically. So in the trade, we have two types of accounts. One is current account, another one is the capital account. So whenever you talk about the current account, it only talks about the export and imports of goods and services. So if your import is more than the export, then we can say there is a possibility, there is a current account deficit. So if there is a current account deficit, how the current account deficit is basically managed or it is financed. So the current account deficit can be financed through some kind of government intervention, or it can be also financed through the market related forces. By that, they can increase the export performance, by that the deficit can be removed. So in that case, if it is mostly financed through these market related forces, we can say that the financial market is more developed. So if it is, the deficit will be recovered or deficit will be financed by any kind of government measures or through the government policies, then our government intervention, then we can say that the financial market is not good enough to cover up that particular thing. So because of that, the government has to intervene into that. So if it is financed through the market related force, we can say that the system is more developed or the financial market is more developed, unless not. And financial markets should be fully integrated domestically as well as internationally. What does it mean? That means there should be proper linkage across the markets. We have the many markets. We have money markets, we have stock market, we have foreign exchange market. We have many different types of the markets. So if the markets are really highly integrated, or one market has a strong relationship with another market, then we can say that this is a developed financial sector. And as well as you can also see the Indian market can be linked to the what is that called US market. That Indian stock, Bombay Stock Exchange is related to, or the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, or the money market in India is related to the money market in US. So in that case, we can say there is a proper integration which is happening. So if there is a proper integration which can happen across the markets, then we can say also this particular financial market is developed. So there is some kind of international flow which is happening, and that is basically contributing to the market to a larger extent. So because of that, we can say that the financial market is more developed. And whenever you are investing in the market, or you are putting your money in the market, always you remember the transaction cost or the information cost should be low. The transaction cost and information cost should be low. So when the transaction cost or the information cost will be low, that can be possible whenever there is less asymmetric information in the market. If there is a huge difference between buyers and sellers, then you'll find there is a huge difference in terms of the pricing. But if the information gap will not be there, then you have a strong confidence on the market. Then automatically the price gap between the buyers and the sellers, whatever price they are demanding and whatever price the buyer is ready to pay and whatever price the seller is demanding, always you will find that that difference will be very less. That means we can say that the transaction cost in the market is relatively low. That means there are a lot of transparency. There are a lot of transparency in the market which is prevailed. So that's why the transparency only can be possible whenever your governance and this development in the sector is happening, or that is basically prevailed in the market. So that's why the transaction, lower the transaction cost, more the development or more developed market, what we can say. And another thing is the private banking versus public sector banking. You see, every time we should not completely dependent on the banking sector and these particular banks which are basically always owned by the government. In India, previously we have only the public sector banks. The State Bank of India, all types of banks, this whatever you have observed, this Canada Bank, you have the Punjab National Banks, all our banks are basically the public sector banks. And the ownership, if you look at, mostly the banks are owned by the maximum ownership is basically owned by the government. But over the time, if you can observe that we have more number of the private banks. And the private banks like your SDFC, your ICICI, your Axis Bank, and all types of banks are basically called as the private banks. So once if you observe that the private banking sector is developing, or there is a huge development which is happening with respect to the private banking, then what basically we can say that the particular market is more developed. That means this circulation, there is enough money which can be circulated, enough servers will be there, everybody can get this kind of banking facility. So in that sense, it will contribute to the financial development process to a larger extent. And we should have a strong and effective system of supervision, inspection, auditing, and regulation, which is basically done by the different regulatory bodies. We have the 4 different regulatory bodies. We have Reserve Bank of India, we have SEBI, we have PFRDA, we have IRDA, which is basically from time to time they're regulating or supervising this particular system, or they are trying to make this particular system more effective in terms of the performance or in terms of operations, and as well as also they take care of the stakeholders by keeping certain kind of market disciplines, and as well as the governance system of the different kind of organizations also can be better off. So that is basically always comes from the regulatory point of view. So if the investors' grievances is properly addressed, if this market participants' grievances are properly addressed, then you are basically not facing any kind of hassle whenever you are trying to invest in the market. Or if you are facing any problem, whether your problem is resolved this particular by the different bodies effectively. So those things basically will depend upon that how the market is basically regulated, or how these supervising systems of the particular market is really happening in that particular point of time. So in that case, we can say that the supervision system should be also quite strong, which makes this particular system more robust. Then we have
Sir.
hello.
Yes, sir. So, can you go on the previous slide, slide number 16?
Again बोलो रे, सुनाई नहीं दिया. Again you tell me.
Sir, can you go on slide number 16? I have doubt in one of the points.
Tell me.
Yes, sir. So, in this intermediation ratio, sir, I'm not able to understand what metrics are we using to uh, like measure the secondary issues and the primary issues. Like in the finance ratio, we're able to say like कि money we are comparing, we are having the ratio in terms of money कि जैसे ही primary में IPO वगैरह में होता है that compared to secondary is the when they are in the listed. So similarly in the intermediation ratio, like what metrics do we use to like measure the ratio?
It is the same thing. What is the total amount of money which is raised from the primary market? Okay. And what is the total amount of money available in the secondary market? You take the ratio of that.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir,
It is. Go ahead. Tell me.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, sir. And so, I have one more question on the 17th slide.
17.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Tell me.
Sir, sir, in this, when you said about private banking and not public sector banking is predominant, so how it is working towards the development of financial development? Because like even if the public sector banking is predominant,
No. Actually, maybe I'm this line literally looks like stronger. So this is basically what I am trying to say. I'm not saying that the public sector banking should not be developed. What basically maybe the not what basically should not be there. Basically, we're talking about we should not completely rely upon the public sector banking, right? So the basic maybe you can delete this word not. It is that means we are talking about the private banking in this particular system should be predominant in the sense that we should not completely rely upon the government to develop this banking sector. We should also try to develop the private banking. Are you getting my point? The private banking means why basically what is the reason I got your doubt. What basically you were trying to say. I'm not saying that the public sector banking should not be developed. What basically I'm trying to say, with this public sector banking, the private banking should be encouraged or private banking should be developed. By that, it will basically increase the economies of scale. Friends, are you getting my point? What I'm trying to say?
Sir, I'm Shachi, and yes, I'm getting it. Yes, sir.
No, what actually I'm trying to say, you see, public sector bank actually, if you are all the banks will be only dominated by the public sector, then what will happen that we cannot go unlimited amount of the banking sector development within this particular system. Government may not basically have the ownership of all the banks which are prevailed or which are operating in a system. So if the government will basically allow the private banking or the private banking will be enhanced, then the banking services to the majority of the people will be possible because the number of banks will increase. I'm talking about economies of scale in the sense the number of banks in the system will be increasing and the complete reliance on the government will be relatively declining. These private banks will be regulated. This will follow this particular regulatory policy what the public sector banks are following. but the number of banks will increase. By that, the facilities or the circulation of the savings will be better off if the number of banks will increase. And number of banks will increase once you are allowing the private sector banking. You see the Indian context. Number of private banks are more or number of public sector banks are more in India in today's context?
Yes, sir.
Now the private banks are more. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Many private banks have been getting license by the from the Reserve Bank of India, which is basically helping the people to access the bank in an effective way. But whenever there was only public sector banks, maybe the banks were only located in some places where the few people are able to access them. But now whenever the number of banks are more, then what is happening? The accessibility to the banks are relatively higher. So maybe you can say that the private banking should be encouraged. Maybe not public sector banking. This word you can ignore. Okay, the private banking should be encouraged. Let me revise that. It is, maybe this is from my side. I have this is written in a strong statement. The private banking should be encouraged. Private banking should be developed. You can write. So by that, what we're trying to say, public sector banks will be there. There is no doubt, and that also we need. But what basically we're trying, we should not completely reliance on the public sector banks only, because government has many things to do. So if any time any failure or anything happen, that government should not take all the burdens or all the responsibility. And this is number one. Number two, it will increase the accessibility. Number three, it will also increase the competition across the different. If number of banks, number of players will be more, then basically you will find that will basically increase the competition in the market. So that's why whatever services and all these things you will be getting, that will be basically in a better service. You might have observed what kind of services we get from the banking. Who provides effective service, private banks or public sector banks?
So private banks.
Private banks. Why are you telling that? Because there is a competition. Because there is a competition within across the private banks also. You will find the different type of services. The reason was basically if they will not provide the better service, then they will lose their customer. And automatically, if they lose their customer, then it will have the impact on their total saving accumulation, and automatically their investment aspect also will be getting affected. So keeping that thing in the mind, my point was basically we should always encourage the private banking, and if the private banks are more developed, that is also one of the indicators what we can use that the market is developed. It's not that we should not encourage the public sector banks. It is a complementary. Private banking and public sector banking should be complementary. Is it okay? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So I also have a doubt. For measuring that financial intermediate something ratio, it is the ratio of physical assets to financial assets. So we can measure the financial assets by the money raised from the stock market, but how will we measure the physical assets?
Physical assets, total money which is circulated, it's the capital formation, fixed capital formation.
So then, but that is the financial asset, right?
No. Physical capital, fixed capital formation in the sense the money which is utilized for buying or maybe creating these physical assets within the system. Capital, you are talking about physical capital formation, na?
Yes, sir.
Physical capital formation is nothing but the total amount of money which is utilized for creating the physical capitals in the system. It is mostly the fixed capitals, land, machinery, buildings, all kinds of things comes under the physical capital.
Okay, sir. So, and financial assets are the money raised from the primary and secondary
Financial
market.
assets include savings. Financial assets includes the money flown in the stock market, money flown in the derivatives market, money flown in the debt market, how much total amount of debt is issued, how much total amount of stock is issued, how much total amount of the money market, particularly treasury bills, certificate of deposits, commercial papers, and all kinds of things. So these are basically comes under the financial assets. You are talking about this financial interrelation, na? Financial asset to the physical asset.
Yes,
So you
sir.
have, if you go to the RBI data set, you will have a data set called the capital formation. The capital formation means it includes it only talks about the capital formation in terms of the physical assets or the fixed assets. And we have another assets, total money circulated as financial assets circulated in the economy, which is comprised of the assets in terms of the bank deposits, the assets in terms of the stock market investments, financial market like foreign exchange market, you have the derivatives market and other markets. And you can take the ratio of these two.
Yes, sir. So, and the primary and secondary markets only include the like stock exchange, right?
No. Primary market is available for debt market also, right? Every market has a primary market and secondary market. जो RBI जो treasury bills issue करता है, right? I will discuss about these things whenever we come to the specific market chapters. But I'm just talking about whenever first time the treasury bills are issued, these are basically auctioned in the primary market, right? And treasury bills are basically always comes to whom? Treasury bills are basically can be issued to the banks and other primary dealers. And these banks and primary dealers again reinvest that particular issue in the market to the different other clients. Then once it is first time issued by RBI to the different kind of financial institutions, these are the instruments of the primary market. Then once depending upon the demand and supply, whenever the price of that particular issue changed, then we can call it this is the instrument of the secondary market. For
Okay,
every
sir.
market,
So in this context, we are talking about all the total primary issues and
we are
secondary
talking about
issues.
the aggregate primary and secondary, because this is
Okay,
talking
sir.
about the financial sector development. We are not confining to a particular market, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But sir, the price of the secondary claims, it keeps changing. Like for example, the price of stocks is always varying. So like, how can we
we
calculate
can
this?
measure it only one point of time, right? You are right. There are certain assets which are market linked. Then automatically once it is traded in the market, every day the price will change, every second the price will change. Then at the end of a particular period we can measure this, or you can get a kind of idea that in aggregate actually what is the total amount of money circulated through primary market and what is the total amount of money circulating in the secondary market in a particular day. So at a particular time period you can measure it. Is it okay? But it will change from time to time. You see, if it will change also, if it is the market is there is no such problem in the market, there is no such kind of uneven situation happens in the market, you will find that the fluctuations will not be that much. But if there is some issue which is happening, maybe the market can go down drastically or market can go up also drastically. You might have observed. Yes or no? So
Yes,
that would call it the abnormal situations. But answering to your question, we can say that that is only possible at a particular point of time. You can measure this. It is always variable in nature. You will always there is always a change in terms of that.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So there are certain other things you can keep in the mind, that is presence of strong, active, large size, non-banking financial sector. Also, we should have, which comprise the stock market, debt market, insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, and all these things. Or many type of assets which are traded in the market, and the financial market should provide all type of avenues or all type of resources for the investments within that particular system. Then we have the high level of current and capital account openness and minimum restrictions on the foreign ownership of the assets. That we are doing it, we are going towards that. Capital account convertibility or capital account openness, in this sense, it will be easy for foreign assets to be converted into rupee, and this rupee should be converted into the foreign assets. There should not be much hassle in terms of converting your currency to the other currency and their currency to this currency. whenever they're investing in a particular segment. That is basically related to the foreign portfolio investments or foreign direct investment which is happening in the system. Then we have we'll discuss these things more on this capital account convertibility and what we mean by that, and what is the different conditions, or what is the different kind of logics of our process through which the capital account convertibility happens. That we'll discuss. Then effective and quick enforcement of the financial contracts and recovery of the loans. The NPA should not be very high. The NPA rate, non-performing asset, which is a very much worrisome matter for the banking sector, which is day by day is increasing because of different issues. You might have reading these things in the newspaper. There are every day actually we are observing there are certain default which is happening. There are certain kind of events which are happening, which is because of that the banking sector is suffering a huge amount of loss. Maybe it is because of the fraud. It is because of the we can say that intention of the customers who has taken this particular loan and all these things. So we should have a proper mechanism by that the recovery of the loan can be easily possible, and as well as we should be in a position to recover the loan in an effective way. And last point basically here, what basically we have mentioned here, this all those kind of regulations should be done through the indirect instruments of the monetary policy. You see, what do we mean by the indirect instruments? Which is RBI is following. That means we should not directly control the money supply, because the money supply is not exogenously determined. It is not determined outside the system. So RBI cannot, or RBI should not control the money supply directly. RBI should control the money supply through the different type of other techniques which is indirect in nature. That means there should be a proper theoretical or proper channel through which the money supply should be controlled. That means if they will change this some kind of instruments, then that change in the instrument will have the impact in the other rates. And if the other rates will be changed, then automatically this will have the impact on the total money supply within the system. That I will discuss immediately after this. Whenever we talk about the central banking or the operating procedures of the monetary policy, you will know more about these things, what exactly we mean here, and what are those instruments which comes under the direct instrument, and what are those instruments comes under the indirect instruments. This is what basically always we should. That means our importance should be. That means if the indirect instruments are more frequently used, that means we can say that the market is matured enough to capture any kind of regulatory measure which is taken by the regulatory body, and that can be transmitted to the particular system in an effective way. Then I will give you certain idea that whenever we try to measure the financial development in aggregate, these are some of the indicators. But you can also construct. Which is this particular framework is basically issued by the World Bank and IMF. So you can always have a certain kind of composite measure to understand how your financial market is developed and what is the numerical value you want to find out from this. So this particular yes.
Sir, I have a doubt in the last point you mentioned in the 18th slide.
Tell me.
Sir, like I have two follow-up questions. First is, what kind of indirect techniques are we talking here? And secondly, like even if we are trying to talk about indirect techniques, like what is the need of that? Like, are we talking in terms of gaining power in something and like getting over the laws that are being made by RBI?
No. Actually, I told you that I will discuss elaborately. I am giving you a reason. Let RBI will let money supply in the system is, you can take example, let total amount of money supply is 500 crore, right?
Yes, sir.
Assume, let this is 500 crore. Then what your direct means, what I am telling, that RBI will say the banks now don't give loans to that sector. Let RBI will say that, okay, industrial sector, you reduce the loan. Don't maximum loan can be given to the industrial sector at 100 crore. You don't give more loan to them. Reduce that. Maybe it is now 200 crore. You reduce it to 100 crore. Then private sector lending, it was let 40%. You increase to 30%. So then what will happen? The direct finance which is given to the different sectors will go down. Then automatically what will happen? That will have the impact on the total amount of money supply which is going to decline. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
So in that case, RBI is directly trying to control the money supply. But indirect means what RBI will do? RBI will change the interest rate. Right? If the interest rate will be changed, what interest rate RBI can change? RBI will increase the repo rate. If the repo rate will be changed, then obviously it will automatically the repo rate will have the impact on the deposits rates and the lending rates of the banks, the loan rates of the banks. So if the loan rates will be affected, then automatically the demand and supply of the particular loan will change. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So that is basically what is happening. RBI does not know that how much it is going to be changed, but RBI is trying to control the money supply, either increasing or decreasing through this repo rate. So RBI only simply said the repo rate will be increasing from 4% to or 3% to 4%. Then what will happen in that case? If it will increase from 3 to 4%, then now the banks basically it will be costlier for the banks to get the loan from RBI. So if it is costlier for the banks to get the loan from RBI, then what they will do? They will increase their rates. If they will increase their rates, then automatically this particular individuals or the business sector which was taking the loan, their demand for loan will go down because now the loan will be costlier for them. Yes or no? If it will be costlier for them, then automatically the money supply will go down.
Yes,
If they will not demand for more loan. So that is a indirect instrument. It is not giving the power or something to anybody. That means how effectively this particular channel is utilized or channel is basically working. That basically shows that how your financial sector is developed. So that way basically we have explained, but I will explain more. Already I told you I will explain more on this whenever we talk about the operating procedures of the monetary policy. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the different dimensions what this World Bank and IMF has given to measure this financial development in a composite manner. So financial development, whenever you talk about, or financial sector in overall, whenever you talk about, we have the two different entities. One is your financial institutions, and we have the financial markets. And there are 4 development indicators they have set. One is they talked about the depth, they have talked about the access, they have talked about the efficiency, they have talked about the stability. These are the 4 dimensions they are trying to examine, but these 4 dimensions are the different aspects of the development. What is the depth of the market? Whether the market is access to the stakeholders or not? And what are the degrees of efficiency exist to the particular market? And whether the market is stable or not. Stability. The stability is much more important. If the market is not stable, then we'll be facing much more problem with respect to that. So in this case, how we can measure depth, how we can measure access, how we can measure efficiency, how we can measure stability from the financial markets point of view and as well as financial institutions point of view. That guideline also the IMF or World Bank have given. I've highlighted certain measures or certain kind of proxies which are used to measure this particular financial development. Right? You see, there are 2 different columns. One basically talks about the financial institutions, and the other talks about the financial markets. Then whenever we talk about the depth, what are the different proxies which can be used to understand how depth the market is? What is the level of depth exists in this particular market? So there are 4 measures what they have highlighted in terms of the financial institutions. That is your private sector credit to the GDP. Mutual fund assets, how much mutual fund investments are made to the GDP, pension fund assets to the GDP, then how much non-banking financial assets to the GDP. How much money is basically created through the non-banking financial institutions like LIC, like your other kind of bodies which are existing in the system. So if you talk about the access of the financial institutions, how many bank branches for 1 lakh adults, ATMs for 1 lakh adults, and working capital financed by the banks. Working capital means for day-to-day requirements, the banks basically always take the loan from the the corporate sector always takes a loan from the banks, or banks provides this loan to them for the short-term basis. Then how much working capital basically banks are financing to the different business entities to fulfill their day-to-day requirements. That is called the working
Sir,
capital. Yes.
so can we have a 5 minute break?
Right. Can you start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, what I told you, there are 4 different categories through which the financial development can be measured. One is depth, access, efficiency, and stability. And these four different categories are always measured from both financial institutions perspective and as well as the financial markets perspective. We talked about the depth and access of the financial institutions. Then we can have the efficiency. How we can measure the efficiency? You can take bank net interest margin, bank lending deposit spread, non-investment income to the total income of the banks, return on assets, return on equity, bank cost to the income ratio, bank overhead cost to the total assets, and all these things. You can measure the stability or the risk of the bank, that is bank Z score, non-performing loans to the total loans, bank credit to the bank deposits, capital to risk-weighted assets, and all these things. Then here we have the stock market capitalization to GDP, stock market total value traded to GDP, all kinds of things. You see, you may not, some of the things you may not understand. You will explain those things one by one whenever you come to the respective chapters like banks, like finance, stock market, and all these things. But what is basically my point is, this is a comprehensive measure of the development of the financial, measure of the financial development. And all these kind of ratios or all the kind of variables can be considered whenever we are trying to measure a composite measure. Then what we do, we take these variables, and taking these variables, we basically use certain technique to give the weights to all those factors, like your principal component analysis and other analysis. And we always measure a sub-index like depth, for measuring access, for measuring efficiency, for measuring stability. Then we give this equal weights to all these 4 dimensions. Then finally one score can be calculated. Let, for example, depth, there are 4 indicators. The 4 indicators will be given certain kind of weightage to measure the depth. These 3 indicators will be given certain weightage to measure the access. Then now what will happen? We have an index for the depth, we have an index for the access, we have an index for the efficiency, we have an index for the stability. Then once these 4 sub-indices are created, then we give the, again, weights. Mostly we give the equal weights to all these sub-indices. Then finally we can measure the finance development for the financial institutions. One particular score will be measured for measuring the financial institutions, and another particular score will be measured through financial markets. Then once you can again combine this two by giving the weights, or you can also individually try to examine that how financial development in terms of the financial institutions are measured and how the financial market developments are measured. So that is the basic objective to share with you, that these are the different ways this particular kind of financial development indicator can be created, and these indicators can be always examined statistically or econometrically to examine the relationship between the financial development and the economic growth process. Is it clear? You don't, there is no need to discuss one by one ratios, because that is basically will be discussed automatically once we will come to the, for example, stock market capitalization. Stock market capitalization is nothing but the total amount of shares what the particular company has, stock market has, multiplied by the price of the shares. So you have to consider for all the companies which are traded in the market and take a summation of that. That will give you the total stock market capitalization. Right? Like that, there are many ratios. Return on asset is the net profit by the total assets. Return on equity, it is the total equity by the, it is the total value of the equity, what basically this stock market is using. That is basically in the numerator. And what is the total net profit we have? Net profit upon the total equity. So like that, there are In the return on asset, the asset is in the denominator, and the return on equity, equity is in the denominator. And the numerator, we have the net profit. So like that, we can have many measures what we have. So these measures will be discussing one by one whenever we come to the respective chapters. But I just give you the kind of glimpse that how this a particular score or a particular indicator in terms of the stock market can measure. So just now, this return on asset, like net profit by total assets, this is a measure of the profitability. Return on equity, it is the net profit by the total equity. That is basically also considered as a measure of the profitability. What these particular organizations are considering, this they said if the profitability will be higher, then we can say that the efficiency of that particular system will be better off. So that's why we can say that they are more developed. So this is what basically they mean. Then accordingly, these particular variables are identified. But we'll just discuss all those things very detailed whenever we come to the respective chapters. So that's why we are not going to discuss these things now. I just my objective was to give you the idea that how the overall score of the financial market development can be measured. Is it okay? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Then we will come to another topic that is called very fast. We can go through this because you must have the idea about this. That is basically the risk and return component. What basically always we use to explain the every aspects of the financial markets. What is risk? The risk is basically a situation where the probability distribution of the values is known, but the exact value is not known. Okay. So that means you are expecting there is a 50% chance I may get 10% return. There is a 50% chance I might get 8% return. But at least the probability is known to you. So there is one expectations which is happening, and there is some actual. So there is always a difference between the actual and the expectations. If the difference will be less, then we can say that the risk is relatively less because you are able to accurately predict that particular outcome. Because of that, this differences or the deviation from the actual to the outcome to the expectations or expected value is relatively less. But if the deviations are more, then we can say that there is more risk. So greater the variability or dispersion in the possible outcomes, greater will be the risk. So that's why the risk basically defined as the chance that the expected or the prospective advantage, gain, profit or return may not materialize. That means the actual outcome of the investment may be less than the expected outcome. So you are expecting to get some return. So if that expectations is not materialized or you are not getting that amount of return, then we can say that there is some problem in terms of the investment what basically we have made. So that's why there is a kind of problem in terms of the getting the expected return from this. How we measure the risk in general? Yes. Mathematically, how we measure the risk? Yes. Abhidip, you are telling something? Priyansad, who is telling?
So we can use standard deviation or volatility in case of stocks.
For anything, standard deviation is the one of the popular measures of the risk. Right? You are right. Any other way risk can be measured? Yes.
Based on probabilities. Based on probabilities.
You are not audible. Thoda loudly bolo.
Based on probability, sir. What is the probability of?
Okay.
Success.
Okay. But the probability will give you the risk, or probability you are using for measuring something else, which is a measurement of the risk. Ravi?
We try to figure out the probability of success in an event. If it is very less, then usually the expected returns will be more, and hence
Okay. Okay.
we could.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, what basically I mean in this says, already he said that generally variance or standard deviation is the popular measure of the risk in the absolute sense. The variance and standard deviation generally is a statistical measures of the risk in an absolute sense. And whenever we talk about the covariance measures basically the risk of the security relative to the other security. So if you want to compare between the two, then you can use this covariance. And whenever you are trying to measure the riskiness of a particular security with respect to a single asset, then you can always go for variance or the standard deviation, which is the measure of the risk. Then another risk measure we have, that is called the value at risk. The value at risk is basically a statistical measure which measures the riskiness of the asset of any individual asset, or it can be a combination of the assets or the portfolio of the assets. And how you define the value at risk? It is basically the maximum amount of, or the worst loss, what basically we use. It is defined as the maximum amount of loss or a maximum amount of money, whatever you are going to, you are expected to be lost over a given time horizon at a predefined confidence level. Okay, at a particular confidence level, what is the maximum loss, or in some other language we call it the worst loss. Maximum loss what we can incur with respect to that particular investment, that is basically we call it the value at risk. What is confidence level? Yes. What do you mean by the confidence level?
Where the majority of the probability distribution lies within.
Okay. Can you little bit expand it?
I mean, I know it in statistical sense.
I am asking in the statistical sense only.
Yeah, I mean, usually in a distribution, 95% of the probability is distributed between mu minus 2 sigma to mu plus 2 sigma. We define that as confidence interval, which just means that it is 95% probable to happen within that range.
Within that range. So rest 5%, what do we call it? Total 100% na? If 95%
Yes,
is the confidence level, then 100% minus 95% is 5%. What we call it?
I don't know the name exactly, sir, but there could be some name.
Okay. All of you have studied probability statistics? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So if your total is 100% and 95% is the confidence level, then what is the extra 5% is what we call it?
Sir, I think it's the error or risk.
Margin,
Huh?
I guess.
P-value.
P values. It is called significance level. Right? It is the level of significance. So if your 95% is the confidence level, then 5% is the significance level. Right? So what is the P values then?
Sir, P value denotes the The probability that certain event has some randomness, that is what it
This
usually denotes.
5% जो है वही p value 0.05 is the p value, right? 5% means
Yes,
what?
sir.
0.05 na. So if you are telling 5% significance level, then 0.05 is the p value. So can you explain these things in terms of error, type 1 error and type 2 error? Somebody was telling that. Can you explain it? If I said that 5% significance level, then what this 5% implies?
So there is a 5% probability that the like mean will not lie in that range, 95% range.
Do you aware about the type 1 error and type 2 error?
Yes, sir. Type 1 error is the false positive and type 2 error is.
So this 5% is the type 1 or type 2?
Type 1.
Type 1. That means we are basically, there is a 5% chance of the type 1 error, which is true, we are rejecting it, or it is false, we are accepting it. Which one is true? Type 1 error mein? How to define type 1 error?
False and we are accepting it.
It is false, we are accepting, or it is true, we are rejecting?
Sir, it is false and still we are accepting.
It is type 1 error?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir, I am sure.
Okay, good. So this 5% significance level means we are basically talks about, this is the type 1 error. Okay. So then this at a particular confidence or the significance level, already we have the values. If you are assuming this standard normal distribution, what is the value of 95% confidence level if you are assuming a standard normal distribution of that variable? कितना है?
So can you repeat?
If you are assuming a standard normal distribution, then at 95% or 5% significance level, what is the statistics, Z statistics?
It will be 2, I guess, close to
1.96, right? Okay, fine. So you can find out that confidence level value from this. And for the explanation is basically what? At a 95% confidence level, if you have calculated your value at risk is 5, that means we can say that there is 95% confidence that over the next month, the portfolio will not lose more than 5 million. So that is basically is a measure of the risk, particularly whenever we use from the banking perspective. From the bank perspective, whenever we measure the market risk and other things, the value at risk concept will be used. So we'll also, again, whenever we come to that risk management of the commercial banks, we'll also explain these things more. Already you know there are two types of risk. One is your systematic risk, other one is the unsystematic risk. And the systematic risk cannot be diversified. You cannot reduce it. You cannot basically try to, even if you want, you cannot basically minimize the systematic risk. Generally, the systematic risk arises due to the fluctuations of the macroeconomic fundamentals. If the interest rate will fluctuate, if the inflation rate will change, if the growth rate of GDP will change, then whenever those kind of things will prevail, then basically the systematic risk will be prevailed. So all type of securities or all type of investments what we come across, they all basically are suffering from the systematic risk to some extent. Maybe the degree of impact will be relatively different, but everybody is suffering from, or everybody is getting exposed to the systematic risk. But whenever you talk about the unsystematic risk, it is basically the risk which is related to the individual assets. The individual assets, and this risk can be diversified. The risk can be reduced. So the risks which are particularly confined to a particular company, or it can be confined to a particular individual, that basically that risk is called the unsystematic risk. And in other term, we can call it it is a diversified risk only. This can be reduced by taking certain kind of portfolio measures and other measures. This particular risk can be always diversified. So the other name of the unsystematic risk is basically the idiosyncratic risk. The other name of the unsystematic risk is basically called the idiosyncratic risk. Can you tell me some of the names of the systematic risk? Yes. Batao. Anybody?
So can it be called the market return?
It is a systematic risk is a market risk only.
Yes,
okay.
Risk of
Environmental factors.
Yes.
Environmental factors.
Environmental factors. Okay, fine. Anything else?
Tax reforms, natural disasters.
Reforms.
Yes, sir. Reforms in.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Great recession. Great recession.
Great recession is a risk, but तुम इतना specific event क्यों बोल रहे हो? You tell me common factors which create the risk in the market.
Inflation.
Inflation, yes. Anything else?
Consumers' perspectives.
Unemployment.
सब कुछ बोल दिए रे. हाँ?
Political instability.
Political instability, good. So you can take, okay, you can say market risk, which is generally we measured through beta. We have the interest rate risk. We have the inflation risk. We have the currency risk. We have the political risk, etc., etc. So if any macroeconomic fundamentals will change, any policy measures or any kind of thing which is happening in the market, then it will have the impact on the different other aspects of this particular different sectors. The business sector gets affected, household sector gets affected, companies gets affected, everybody gets affected due to the changes or the fluctuations of these particular factors. If the interest rate will change, then the bond price will change. If inflation will change, it will affect the real valuation of the different assets. If the market risk will change, then automatically it will have the impact on the pricing or the expected return, what you are getting from the stock return and other factors. If exchange rate will change, or there is a fluctuations in terms of exchange rate, then our trade balance will be getting affected. Export and import performance will be getting affected. So in that case, whenever any fluctuations happens with respect to any macroeconomic fundamentals, macroeconomic factors, we are exposed to certain amount of risk, or every sector is exposed to certain amount of risk, and that particular risk is defined as the systematic risk. So I will explain about the market risk. What exactly the market risk is? The market risk basically indicates the extent to which a given asset is non-diversifiable. Generally, it is a coefficient which measures the security's relative volatility. Okay, it measures the security's volatility. Anybody can tell how the beta can be measured? Okay.
It is already mentioned in the slide, like using regression, we can do that.
Regression between?
The return of that particular product versus the market return. Based on that history, we can plot a straight line which fits the best among the data, and we can calculate its slope, which gives us the beta.
Can you tell me the formula from this? What is how the beta is calculated? One is regression. Other one? Any other way?
So covariance divided by The standard deviation of the market and that's it.
Covariance between what?
Covariance between the market and the particular asset.
Okay.
Between the market return
No,
and
sir,
the
I don't think
return of asset.
I don't think covariance gives us the correct value of beta, because for different values of slopes we can still have same
Is this whiteboard
same
visible to
covariance.
you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the beta is generally measured, is right, it is relatively, it is covariance between I and M divided by the variance of the M. Covariance between individual stock return or individual company's return with the market. This M represents the market return, and this talks about the variance of the market return. So if you expand it, covariance means what? It is the, can you write the covariance in terms of the variance and the other terms? Is it possible or not?
Sir,
Yes.
expectation of IM minus expectation of I into expectation of M.
नहीं, वो तो मेजरमेंट के लिए बोल रहे हो. कोवेरियंस को हम लोग कंपोनेंट वाइज डिवाइड कर सकते हैं.
Yes, sir.
It is the.
Yes, sir. We can take into account correlation as well, and sigma square of the two.
Sigma
factors.
square, or it is the sigma of I into sigma of M.
Sigma I into sigma M.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Correlation between rho or correlation between I and M divided by sigma I into sigma M divided by the variance of the M. So you can also write it the correlation between I and M into sigma I divided by sigma M. Right? This is the way through which the beta of a particular single stock basically is measured. Or already I've told you that you can also make a regression between your individual stock return is a function of the market return. So if you regress it in a regression line, let it is alpha plus beta RM. So whatever beta coefficient you get, that is basically your market risk. Okay, so this is your intercept. This is basically your beta. This is basically your beta, which is called the market risk. So the beta basically tells you that if your market is how the particular stock return is responsive towards the market return. That is basically reflected through the beta. Is it clear? Yes or no, Ray?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So what is this L? What is this last term?
Q. That is the error term.
Achha, yes, sir.
That is the error term. Okay. Okay. So the security with higher than 1 beta value, more than, we can say that, are more volatile than the market, and the asset with a lower than 1 beta would rise or fall more slowly than the market. So relatively, how that particular return of that particular asset is linked to the market return or market volatility, that is basically measured through this particular beta. So this is basically called the market risk. Then other important risk is basically your interest rate risk. So interest rate risk is basically what? It is the variability in return on security due to the changes in the level of the market interest rate. Due to the changes in the level of the market interest rates. If the interest rate will change, then the price of certain assets are going to be changed due to the change in the interest rate. So this basically what this particular concept talks about, the interest rate basically has two different parts. There are two components of the interest rate. One is we call it the price risk, other one is called the reinvestment risk. I'll just tell you that what this will explain these things again more, but still I'm just giving you certain idea, then we can close the discussion today. You know that whenever we talk about the price of an asset, what is the price of an asset? How basically we calculate? It is basically your cash flow divided by a discount rate. It is the common valuation formula. You know it or not? We calculate the present value by using the cash flow divided by the discount rate. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it is the common thing I'm writing. I'm not writing any specific formula. So if your discount rate gets changed, then price gets changed. So the discount rate, for example, whenever you talk about a bond price, the bond price is generally your cash flow, all those cash flows including your principal divided by the interest rate. So if the interest rate will change, will increase, then the bond price will decline. If interest rate will decline, your bond price will decline. That is called the price risk. But generally, I'll just give you idea. Whenever you invest in a bond, so what you get? You get coupons, which is periodically. Every 6 months or every 1 year, you get some coupons. If I write 1,000 rupees is the par value of the bond, let the coupon is 10%. You can write the market interest rate is 8%. Then what will happen? Let coupon is paid yearly. Coupon is paid yearly payment. Then every year you will be getting 100 rupees. 10% of the 1,000. Then generally how we discount it? We generally discount it to 100 plus 1 plus r to the power t plus you go on 1 plus r to the power 1. That means it is your in this case it is 1.08 plus 100 divided by 1.08 square plus 100 divided by 1.08 to the power 3. Let the maturity period of this particular bond is 10 years. It will go on. Then in the end of the year, at the year it will be matured, you will be getting your 1,000 rupees back, and as well as your 100 rupees coupon. This is 1,100 divided by 1.08 to the power 10. So that is the way basically this particular bond valuation is done. So every year, anyway, that we will come to know more about these things whenever we talk about the bond market. But my question is that every year you will be getting this 100 rupees. So if your interest rate gets changed, then obviously the discount rate will get changed. If the discount rate gets changed, then automatically your price will be changed. On that particular period, what should be the price? The price will be getting changed. But at the same time, if the interest rate is increasing, then the price will be declining. But this 100 rupees what you are getting, that is fixed. Coupon does not change. This 100 rupees you are getting because coupon is fixed from the beginning, that is 10%. So this rate can be changed only. So if the 100 rupees coupon you receive and this coupon, now the bond price in this particular market will get changed. But what you can do, this coupon can be reinvested in the market. So if this particular coupon will be reinvested in the market, then what will happen? That if the interest rate has become 9%, then again you got, after 1 year you got this 100 rupees. This 100 rupees you can now put the money in somewhere else where you get the 9% return. Then your return can be also increased. So change in interest rate will have the both. It will affect the price of the bond, what investment already you have made. It will also affect the reinvestment risk, which is basically telling that the extra amount of return you can also generate if you are putting that particular money in the market further. That 100 rupees periodic cash flow, what you will be getting. So increasing the interest rate will increase the price risk, but it will compensated by this reinvestment risk. Yes. Any question there? Yes. Somebody was asking something. No question? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's why the interest rate risk has the two component. One is your price risk, other one is the reinvestment risk. And always we have to ensure that whether the price risk is more or reinvestment risk is more. Accordingly, we can say that if there is a change in interest rate, how basically we can maximize our return and other things. Okay, we can close here. The other from here, I will discuss other aspects of this risk aspect and all these things. Then we can